What you're about to see in front of you guys was straight up the craziest damage I have ever seen. Crazier than Star Eater Scales, crazier than Yeet. Fellas, this right here is 100% going to be the meta for your raid team, for your strike team, for everything, pretty much for the entirety of this season, if it doesn't get nerfed. Now, I actually think it won't be nerfed because if you remember, Energy Accelerant used to double the slam damage of our Yas sword last season, and Bungie never actually fixed that. Not only that, one of the mods that we're actually taking advantage of, which is Focusing Lens, we were able to do the exact same thing back in season 13 with it. So today, guys, let's go down the rabbit hole of how to set this build up for you and your fire team, how to essentially one-face every boss in the game with your favorite linear fusion rifle or fusion rifle. First up, let's talk real quick about two different mods. One of them is Focusing Lens. States that your line abilities do bonus damage to combatants affected by stasis. Now, a fantastic mod. We've taken advantage of it in the past. Normally, I would use things like Revenant, pop a Silence and Squall out, apply the stasis effect to all the surrounding enemies, and Lesser Bombad would clean up with the Chaos Reach Super or something that does light ability damage. However, inside of Destiny 2, if you have a friend that drops a Well of Radiance and you happen to be rocking Focusing Lens, the game thinks you're doing light ability damage while standing in that Well of Radiance, thus allowing you to take advantage of Focusing Lens. Yes, I'm on the Revenant class. Yes, it's a stasis class, and I shouldn't be able to take advantage of Focusing Lens, but I am. I'm able to slot this into my class item, and because the game sees me standing in a Well of Radiance, it defaults to all of my weapon damage as light ability damage, thus giving us the increase there in damage, which does stack with Well of Radiance, which, by the way, is a 25% buff there. So any outgoing damage from within Well of Radiance counts as ability damage or super damage, which is why everyone on your fire team should be rocking Focusing Lens this season. Now, Focusing Lens is a 25% buff that stacks on things like Well of Radiance. However, you can still apply this with Weapons of Light. Well of Radiance is a 25% buff. Weapons of Light is a 35% buff. Now, the way things work inside of Destiny 2, when it comes to supers that grant you buffs, the higher percentage takes precedence. Meaning if you get into a bubble and you get the 35% buff, but you stand in a Well of Radiance, you will have a 35% buff instead of a 25% buff, at least until Weapons of Light runs out. As soon as that duration runs out, if Well of Radiance is still there, it will then default to the Well of Radiance buff. Luckily though, Focusing Lens and its stacking ability with Well of Radiance will still work with our bubbles weapon damage as long as you stand in a Well of Radiance. So essentially drop a bubble, then proceed to move forward and stand in a well. All of this is still working as intended. You're still getting that 35% buff, but Focusing Lens, because you're still standing in a Well of Radiance, it's granting you this buff. Now, Focusing Lens, at least from my knowledge, does not work with just Bubble Titan by itself. You have to be standing in a Well of Radiance in order for it to still count as light ability damage. But again, having Weapons of Light with that higher increase in damage will override Well of Radiance, at least until Weapons of Light runs out for you. Now, that gets all the buffs out of the way. And again, whoever it is that's rocking stasis, whether it's a Revenant, somebody rocking Warlock with Stacy and throwing out stasis turrets, it really doesn't matter. And honestly, Dustfield grenades are one of the best ways to do it, and I actually like to do both, where I cast my super like Silence and Squall and follow up with a grenade. And even if you go past the damage phase where your stasis is no longer applying stasis damage to whatever it is you're trying to kill, throwing a melee out there will refresh things, allowing for Focusing Lens to stay procced. And these are major buffs that are stacking with each other. But now, let's talk about debuffs. One of the best mods this season, which is exactly why you've seen so many videos from us ranking fusion rifles and linear fusion rifles, the rise of Sleeper Simulant, 1000 Voices, Threaded Needle. These are all very good weapons, but the main thing that's making them so good is Particle Deconstruction. Dealing damage to a combatant with a fusion rifle or linear fusion rifle grants bonus damage with the fusion rifle or linear fusion rifle against that combatant for a short duration. This effect stacks up to 5 times. Now, there's something to know here, guys. The effect stacks up to 5 times, meaning for a linear fusion rifle, you have to get 5 shots off on the enemy in order to reach that max stacks of that debuff, which, by the way, at max is a 40% debuff. It's very good, like stupid good. However, there are some weapons that allows you to immediately proc it. Things like 1000 Voices that does like a burst of fusion rifle damage. A fusion rifle, which fires off a volley volley of bolts. This can apply that immediate stack of particle deconstruction at ×5, allowing you to reach that 40% even quicker. And of course, if the entire fire team is rocking particle deconstruction, it's much easier to reach that 40% debuff. However, you really don't need the entire fire team rocking this, as it's much more important that the entire team is rocking focusing lens, and maybe 1 to 2 people are rocking particle deconstruction. And again, you can prime with the fusion rifle before you start dealing damage with your linear or 1000 voices. This 40% debuff works for you and your teammates, regardless of whoever it is that applies it. Now, the 40% debuff is very nice, but similar to focusing lens, it too can stack, meaning debuffs like hammer strike, tractor cannon, tether, all of this will stack with particle deconstruction. The only debuff that it runs into problems with is divinity. Anything else though will work. All global debuffs. And by the way, if you're seeing this spreadsheet in front of you, I will be linking this in the description, but all global debuffs and that 30% will stack with particle deconstruction. Now stated right here, that's an 82% debuff when stacked together. Fellas, that combination is essentially what's allowing us to see this type of damage. So you have focusing lens for all your teammates. You apply stasis damage, whether it's with your super or your grenade. You take advantage of particle deconstruction for your linear or fusion rifle, and you stack a tether or another debuff on top of it. The only thing that you have to worry about is that particle deconstruction has to be procced before any other debuff. Now, this does not conflict at all with the buffs, focusing lens, weapons of light, well of radiance, any of those. It doesn't run into any problems with those buffs, and you don't really have to worry about getting your timing right there. But for your debuffs, at least from what we've seen, you want to try to proc particle deconstruction and then get a tether off. And it's something to do with how particle deconstruction works and how it stacks. Sometimes it conflicts. And this is the same thing for all debuffs in the game. And I'm still trying to do some testing, and there is some crazy stuff because you'll see bosses go from like half health to immediately no health. It's obvious that the game is trying to keep up with the amount of damage that we're doing. All I can tell you is that whoever it is that's got particle deconstruction, get a fusion rifle shot off first, then your hunter can drop a tether or whatever means else that you're using as a debuff, and then everyone can begin the damage phase. All of this can be taking place though, even while focusing lens, weapons of light, well of radiance, all those things are simultaneously taking place. The order of the buffs doesn't matter, only the debuffs. Now, is this the best damage? Yes. Can it get even better? Actually, yeah. That's what's crazy about this, is that this is not even the final form. You see, there is a mod called Font of Might. Now, Font of Might requires a couple of things. Number one, it states that picking up an elemental well that matches your subclass energy type grants a temporary bonus to weapon damage of that same elemental type, meaning everything has to match. One of the best ways to produce elemental wells in this sandbox is elemental armaments. It got a buff this season, and it simply requires weapon takedowns with the damage type that matches your subclass element have an escalating chance to spawn an elemental well. Now, this runs into a problem because even though you see a cycle in between different weapons, whether it's Sleeper Simulant, 1000 Voices, those are solar-based weapons. And if we're trying to match subclasses here, well, we can't take advantage of things like Focusing Lens, as no one's able to apply stasis. And we can't take advantage of debuffs like Tether, which is arguably one of the easiest debuffs to take advantage of, as you can shoot it from a distance. What weapons are able to synergize? Because again, the buff from Font of Might only applies to weapons that have the same matching energy type as your subclass. This is where the BOOM Strat comes in. What we just went over was just the BOOM Strat. Weapons of light, well of radiance, particle deconstruction, tether, focusing lens. That's the BOOM Strat, which is still very, very good. And you really don't need to go beyond that. But when the time comes, the BOOM Strat can get even nastier. And this is going to require everyone rocking focusing lens, everyone rocking Font of Might, but having matching elemental types from your heavy weapons. So for solar, 1000 Voices or Sleeper. For stasis, Reed's Regret, which by the way will be dropping this Friday from Trials of Osiris. Yes, I know I just told you Reed's Regret and Firing Line will be the next meta, but no, Firing Line is currently bugged and it's not actually giving you the full 20%. Hopefully Bungie will fix that. In the meantime, Reed's Regret of Vorpal is still going to be fantastic. And then for my Tether Hunter, Font of Might with Threaded Needle, as Threaded Needle does void damage. You see how we're able to satisfy these things? I know my paint job here sucks, but I'm trying to just separate things into houses. These are the houses. The problem is, this takes a little more setup. Getting Font of Might. Number one, getting that elemental well to drop for you. Number two, not only getting the elemental well, but getting set up to do the damage phase. And again, there's a lot of things happening here. Proccing Particle Deconstruction, getting the tether off afterward, having all your buffs out. Will you have enough time to take advantage of Font of Might? Maybe. It's definitely something we're trying to perfect. And I only want to leave you with this for those that want to take the BOOM Strat and take it to the boom boom. If you want to take it beyond. I will say this though, regardless of whether or not you do Font of Might or any of those things, the damage that what you see here in front of you from just the BOOM Strat alone is plenty enough. You will easily be able to one face multiple bosses and raid bosses and strike bosses, primevals, whatever. All of these bosses get absolutely shredded with this setup. And again, like always, we already went over fusion rifle testing in the past in our fusion rifle rankings. This included linears as well. In terms of the highest DPS, Threaded Needle with Vorpal, Reach Regret with Vorpal, those weapons are the best. They even surpass that of Sleeper because a lot of people like to rock things like Wither Horde with Threaded Needle, as Threaded Needle and Reach Regret are legendaries. But if you want to just talk about ease of use, I think Sleeper Simulant is super easy to use and it's very forgiving as its body shot damage is very solid still. And of course, 1000 voices, even though it doesn't have the total damage in comparison to Sleeper, its overall ease of use and forgiveness is unmatched as you don't even have to land crits with this thing. It doesn't do crit damage. Somebody came out the stream the other day and was like, yo, why aren't you aiming for the head with 1000 voices? Well, it's because it doesn't do crit damage. It's a fusion rifle, which is why on bosses that do have a higher crit multiplier, take the Last Wish raid with Shurachi in the first encounter, that's when you do want to use linear fusion rifles that do crit damage. And that's what you see here. We're able to kill bosses here in Last Wish that have a higher crit multiplier in one phase, which is 3 people on the fire team. That's the kind of damage that the BOOM Strat here is producing. So guys, get your hand on these mods, try them out for yourselves, get the timing down correctly here. Again, the timing of your buffs doesn't matter, but the timing of your debuffs kind of does. Particle Deconstruction first, so a single shot from a fusion rifle or 1k voices, and then follow it with the tether and go to Pound Town. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.